Welcome to another edition of Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show. I'm Anthony T, as this is the last episode of Horror Month on the podcast, where it's all horror. It goes back to the roots every October, featuring all horror all the time on the podcast. In this episode, next segment, I will be talking about how Terrifier 3 beat the Joker at the box office to become the #1 film in America for 1 week before Smile 2 became #1 at the box office. And by the time this episode comes out, I'm probably sure Venom: The Last Dance will be #1 at the box office. So that's pretty much 3 horror films right there at the box office at #1. It's a great time to be a horror fan, people. Seriously. Horror movies are becoming #1 at the box office. That's what I like to see here. I'll talk more about Terrifier 2 beating the Joker at the box office, and to go into why I think WBD is in really serious trouble. More like on the levels of Lionsgate. You haven't heard about Lionsgate's troubles? You know, they've been having a really bad year as well as WBD, Warner Bros. Discovery. But I'll get into that more next segment. Then I'll go into my Rhode Island Comic Con 2024 preview, as I will talk about the upcoming convention that takes place November 1st through the 3rd at the Amica Mutual Pavilion in Rhode Island Convention Center. Then in What's Anthony T Watching, I review a Halloween-themed film that was released this year, and I have to go all the way to Screambox to find that film. So I will be reviewing that film for better or worse, because Screambox and Shudder, sometimes their films can be 50-50 at best, especially Screambox. But first, the news. Starting off the news, well, it looks like we may not get a Blade film after all. This film has suffered through a lot of pre-production problems and everything. There's been casting announcements. There's been hopes for this film to be filmed. But according to Marvel Studios, the long-delayed Blade has now been removed altogether from its November 7th, 2025 release date from the calendar, as it's pretty much now off the calendar and it does not fit in to any of their future plans. So this is not good, everyone. Seriously. We've been waiting for this Blade movie for quite a while. Ever since they announced it, they kind of teased it, and we're not going to get it. It's not going to happen, as it looks like it's been scrapped completely, as it's been removed from the release calendar, and it's not going to come back anytime soon, seriously. Because I don't believe it has any plans with the multiverse that's going on with the current story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Blade will not be hitting theaters anytime soon. This film has been going through directors and writers like crazy ever since this was announced 5 years ago. We've had 2 directors attached to this film. We've had 6 writers attached to this film. And this is like a 5-year span, and still we have not gotten any movement or any closer to production on this film. And to make matters really worse, bringing back Wesley Snipes as Blade in Deadpool vs. Wolverine is kind of making people want the old Blade back. Sure, I would love to see the old Blade back, quite frankly, because I loved Wesley Snipes as Blade when it hit theaters in the 90s, portraying that character. And I think there's been some resurgence that people want to see Wesley Snipes back as Blade. And I have no problem with that, as I kind of like the fact that he came back. Seriously. In Deadpool vs. Wolverine. I thought he did fine in it. It made me kind of wanted the original Blade back, quite frankly. So that's another problem the MCU has. Maybe it's probably for the best right now to scrap Blade if I was the MCU. If you want to go in a different direction, you might want to wait a bit. Then go in that direction. Or bring Wesley Snipes back as Blade. I'll take either or at this point. I just want another Blade movie. I love the character. I love the Marvel superhero. I love the vampire hunter that Blade is. But right now, we are not getting another Blade film. And it's just because of all this stalling. Now, we had some bad news about it, but at least some good news came out of this film being completely off the release schedule, as another sci-fi horror film has taken over that release date. And yes, I'm talking about The Predator. It's coming back to the big screen where it should have been all along. After the success of Prey, the next Predator movie, Predator Badlands, will be released next November. The exact release date where Blade was supposed to be on Disney's schedule. And I really like the fact that Disney finally realized that The Predator can still be a viable property if done right. As Prey was an excellent Predator movie. Too bad it got dumped to streaming because, well, of The Predator. Yeah, the movie before Prey, which was so awful. It really made me embarrassed, quite frankly, to be a fan of the franchise. Seriously. But thankfully, The Predator is going back to the big screen. And it is a credit probably because Prey was successful in both storytelling-wise and in both getting a lot of interest on Hulu. And I think Disney finally realized that they can put The Predator back in theaters. Hell, they put Alien back in theaters this year, and that did well at the box office. So, there's still life in both the Alien property and the Predator property at the box office. You just have to tell better stories. And what was hurting both franchises was the fact that the stories were bad. Alien was the fact that the last two Alien films were both too cerebral for Alien fans. And maybe that's why it didn't do so well at the box office. Plus, Ridley Scott had control too, which didn't help as well, quite frankly. And with Predator, that last movie that hit the box office was a complete disgrace to the franchise. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's why that got dumped to streaming. Because of that last movie, which was so poorly written, poorly acted, and poorly directed. It was like one of the worst sequels I've ever seen. And I've seen bad sequels. This would probably be one of the worst, quite frankly. The Predator. If not up there as the worst, seriously. It's like it's up there with some really bad sequels like Halloween 5, Halloween 6. I'm trying to think of some others. Nightmare on Elm Street 6. Jason X is a really bad sequel, but it's a guilty pleasure at least. But anyway, it's great to see the Predator franchise back on the big screen where it belongs. And I really hope it does well at the box office, which I think it will now because Prey was such a big hit on streaming. Moving on. Now, I should talk about other horror news, but I have to talk about this really absurd horror news that recently popped up. Seriously, it's just so absurd to even take time out of my segment to talk about this. Because seriously, I am a huge fan of the Scream franchise. And I like Matthew Lillard. Seriously. He's a good actor. I liked him in Twin Peaks. He was good in Five Nights at Freddy's. Even though that was a so-so film. So, when I saw this news story, I had to think to myself, are you really kidding me? Are we still on this subject years after the original Scream? Seriously, buddy? I like you, man. But seriously, and spoiler alert for those who have not seen the original Scream film, Stu Macher is still dead. Seriously. I don't get why Matthew Lillard still thinks that Stu Macher is alive. He is dead. I don't buy the fact that the character survived. First of all, the guy had his head smashed with the television on. You would think it'd be a lot of electricity going through the head. That'd be probably enough to kill somebody. Seriously. Then you also got those wounds that he suffered in the film too. And he was really bleeding badly. Seriously. So, I don't get the notion why Matthew Lillard still thinks that the character is still alive. Seriously. Now, he was on the Drew Barrymore show promoting his latest reality show. And before I forget to do this, I am contractually obligated to do this because Matthew Lillard was there to promote Jason Blum in Blumhouse Productions' reality show Killer Cakes, in which he's the host of the reality show. He also went to chat also about the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy 2 that will be filming very, very soon, because that's supposed to come out next year. And I don't know why he still has these theories on this character. Literally. Why do you think Stu Macher is still alive? Spend the time and energy, promote your show, promote the upcoming Five Nights at Freddy's 2. But it's just nauseating to think that somehow Matthew Lillard still thinks Stu Macher is alive. There's a lot of evidence that that character is pretty much dead. Seriously. It does not take a genius to find out. It's like he never ends about how he thinks Stu Macher is still alive in the Scream universe. I'm sorry, he's not. At all. You're lucky to get Skeet Ulrich back into the Scream universe. You had to find some really good way, like a psychotic delusion that the main character of Scream 5 and Scream 6 has, in which she sees her dead father, to bring Billy back into the franchise. But there is no way you can bring Stu Macher back to this franchise, because you cannot go the same route as you did with Billy in Scream 5 or Scream 6, because if you do that, it would be very redundant. And redundancy does not work well. Seriously, everyone. In fact, it just kills everything. And it probably ruins the franchise as well when you become redundant. You're already trying to figure out how to do the next Scream film with Neve Campbell, which is going to be an interesting one, seriously. With all the controversy and the behind-the-scenes chatter between this one and the last one, it's going to be a very interesting film nonetheless, because Kevin Williamson has returned to the series. And he will be writing and directing this film. So, it's going to be an interesting film. But back to Matthew Lillard. I hate to break it to you, Matthew. Stu Macher is dead. He is not coming back to this franchise. And if he came back to this franchise, it would be so absurd that it would jump the shark. I'm sorry. it just would jump that shock. And once you jump the shock, there's no coming back from it. And that's the news. Every day there's a family struggling with hospital bills to care for their sick child who is fighting an illness. There's a woman who is fighting breast cancer and is having trouble making ends meet while paying for their treatment. And there are burn victims that are going through treatments to heal their deep wounds. There is a charity in the horror community that helps these people. Scares That Care is an organization that helps families deal with the bills for their child. They help women get the treatment they need to fight breast cancer, and they help people who are dealing with severe burns get the help they need to heal. Scares That Care is a 100% volunteer organization and 501c3 nonprofit charity that is dedicated to helping these people in fighting real monsters. To find out more information or to donate to Scares That Care, you can go to www.scaresthatcare.org. Every donation helps Scares That Care fight real monsters. Welcome back. Now, recently Terrifier 3 did the unthinkable at the box office. It debuted at number 1 at the US box office. This is another major milestone for indie horror this year, as this has been a banner year for indie horror. Seriously, with films like Long Legs, Immaculate, and Late Night with the Devil leading the way for indie horror at the major box office this year. It's been kind of a banner year for indie horror, quite frankly. As this is probably one of its best years to date, as I've never, I think, seen 4 films reach double digits in terms of gross at the box office for an indie horror film. But we have 4 this year that did that. Now, I don't know where to start with the story here. Now, should I start with the success of Terrifier 3? Because that is a big story unto itself. Or should I start with the major colossal failure of Warner Brothers Discovery in the way Joker 2 has played out at the box office? Now, I don't give the time of day to comic book films here on the podcast, but this is a major story here involving 2 films with 2 killer clowns, basically. Thinking about it. You know what? Let's start off with Warner Brothers Discovery, as they seem like they've become a topic on this podcast throughout the last 2 years, literally. So, might as well get this out of the way. Get all the negativity out of the way. And the fact that Joker 2 got beat by a film that was made for only $2 million. That's right. Joker 2 got beat by Terrifier 3, which had a total budget of $2 million. And more embarrassing to this is the marketing campaign for Terrifier 3 was $500,000. To Warner Brothers, spending millions and millions on Joker 2 trying to promote that film? Well, that film did not get off to a great start at the box office, everyone, as Joker 2 debuted on its opening weekend with $37.8 million. A week before Terrifier 3's opening. Then it would proceed to take one of the biggest nosedives and collapses of all time, pretty much, as the film dropped 81% from its opening weekend. This was epic. It only made an estimated $7 million over the second weekend of release. Now, no one saw this coming. I didn't even see this coming. Hell, I didn't even think Terrifier 3 would be number one at the box office, given the fact that Joker 2 premiered the week before. But when you take an 81% drop, stuff like that is going to happen. And it's not even close. That's the other thing here that's so shocking about this box office result here. This was supposed to be a tentpole movie. This was supposed to be on top of the box office for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. Instead, it only managed 1 week. Now, this coming off of Variety, the film is projected to lose $150 to $200 million after its theatrical run because of that major nosedive. No one saw this coming at the beginning of the year, as this really has been a bad year for Warner Brothers Discovery in its theatrical department. Furiosa, a Mad Max story, didn't do well at the box office. Sure, I liked the movie. I thought it was a really good movie, but I was surprised that didn't do well, considering it's based off of Mad Max. But it wasn't the disaster that Joker 2 was. The only thing that's gone right for Warner Brothers Discovery this year has been the release of Beetlejuice. Now, that's a film that's been doing well at the box office for them. If not, it would have been a disaster of a year. More like Lionsgate type disaster. Because both of those studios have had disaster years. Seriously. Lionsgate have their own problems, as they've had major failures like Borderlands and the Crow reboot, to name a few. But Joker 2 really is a major disaster for the studio. And there is something wrong with the studio. Seriously. Part of it was the fact that critics and fans hated the film. Everybody hated the film. And according to ScreenRant.com, this film never got test screened. If you're doing a $200 million film, you should at least test screen the film before you put it out to the public. Never in their right minds did Warner Brothers Discovery test screened the film. Sure, they test screened Evil Dead Rise, and that got a theatrical release because of it. But they declined to test screen Joker 2, and they paid the price heavily. And people are wondering why Terrifier 3 is number one at the box office. A lot of it has to do with Warner Brothers Discovery and its film division. Because for a $200 million film, you should test screen your film. Seriously. And they did it with this film. And they are paying the price for it. Because, again, to that Variety report, the film is projected to lose $150 to $200 million. You cannot forego test screening for a film that costs $200 million. That is just irresponsible. And it should cost somebody their job. Seriously, it should. Literally. Because people wonder why Warner Brothers Discovery is having financial problems. That's one of the reasons. I think it's management down there in its film division. Seriously. Enough talking about the negativity of Warner Brothers Discovery. Let's get to the positive and how Terrifier 3 hit number one at the box office. First up, you have to go all the way back to Terrifier 2 and the fact that that film started getting buzz once it started playing theaters. Sure, it wasn't a major hit, as I believe it made around $10 million at the box office. But still, it got a lot of attention from people walking out. Some people on the major shows were mentioning this film, and everything really started to fall into place for Terrifier 2. To the point when we get to Terrifier 3, it gets a wider release. It probably also helped that it probably did really good numbers on home media sales and digital sales to warrant the fact that it deserved a expanded theatrical release, and a big one at that, to the point where it's not just playing at night, it's playing throughout the day like every other film. And that's a very good sign for this franchise, that theaters are booking full days of screenings for this film. The fact that it hit number 1 is just mind-boggling. Seriously. I did not have that on my horror bingo card in 2024 where Art the Clown would beat the Joker at the box office. I don't think anybody had that on their horror bingo card. But that did happen at the box office. And it did happen in 2024. A lot of it, I think, had to do with creative marketing, too. They only spent about $500,000 on the marketing for this film. But there were a lot of people doing interviews for this film, too. And it helped that Terrifier 2 was so buzzworthy that a lot of people from the cast of Terrifier 2 were popping up on interviews and popping up on popular podcasts as well to promote the film. Media and social media are key into promoting a film. You also had Art the Clown visit a random Spirits Halloween and a random Spencer's too. On top of that, to add to the digital online media, which was also a great way to promote this film, as those ads were very well executed. It had a little humor to it, and it also allowed David Howard Thornton to be a riot as Art the Clown as well, in costume, having fun. It added to the buzz of this film, because seriously, you only have $500,000 to promote your film. So you're going to try everything and anything to promote your film. And I really love those Spirit Halloween and Spencer vignettes online on Facebook. They do a great job promoting the film. Also, you have a music video out right now on YouTube with the official song for Terrifier 3, which is more like the film as well, as it's a very gory video from Ice Nine Kills. It's a very good video too. I liked the music video as well. That's also added promotion to the film. That you have a popular horrorcore band like Ice Nine Kills singing the film's official theme song and having Art the Clown himself in the music video doing what he does best. That adds to the hype of the film. Plus, you get the audience reactions to the film after its first week, when people start walking out of the theater because they couldn't take this film. Because there have been walkouts, there have been people vomiting. You will get these stories, then word of mouth spreads. Either that happens, or they love the film because it's getting a very positive film score as well. As on Rotten Tomato at this moment, as I'm filming this vignette, this film has a 76% Rotten Tomato score, which is good, and a 7.1 IMDb rating, which is good for a horror film. So there's a lot of buzz to this film. Now, if you want my thoughts on this film, go to the Film Arcade Media YouTube channel at youtube.com/FilmArcadeMedia, where I give you my instant thoughts on the film. Because I'm not going to go into my thoughts on this film here because, well, as I'm recording this, I haven't seen the film. So, I can't give you thoughts if I haven't seen the film, obviously. So, go to Film Arcade Media's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FilmArcadeMedia to get my thoughts on Terrifier 3. So, it's just amazing that Terrifier 3 is on top of the box office. I did not expect this to happen at all. And it's another major win for independent horror this year. The fact that we're getting 4 independent horror films making double digits at the box office. That's probably one of the biggest news stories of the year in horror. Seriously. That indie horror is starting to take over. And it's starting to break into the mainstream, which is a great thing. Because maybe it'll get the studios to up their game in the horror genre. And that's what we want. We want great films, so us horror fans win. It's films like the Terrifier series, or the Halloween series, or the Friday the 13th series that make us horror fans love this genre. And the fact that a film that had a marketing budget of $500,000 and made for $2 million is on top of the box office is quite incredible. Seriously. It's a great time to be an independent horror fan. Seriously. Great time. Because these movies are starting to hit the mainstream and independent horror may be on the cusp of a boom in major theaters after the year it's having.
Welcome to Dark Discussions, your place for the discussion of horror film, fiction, and all that's fantastic. A weekly podcast where the discussion is about the most recent horror and genre films. Intelligent talk on a genre that deserves intelligence. A conversation between co-hosts discussing not only the films, but also the connotation that the directors and screenwriters are trying to articulate. When you want more than a review, listen to Dark Discussions.
And speaking of perception, there's just one more scene I want to talk about, which is after Caleb discovers that Kyoto's a robot. Kyoto kind of peels off her skin, showing him what's underneath.
Now, wait a minute. I know where you're going with this, but tell me you weren't already thinking this 15 minutes earlier in the film. Exactly what he's thinking at that moment.
Which is he's a robot too.
Oh, I considered the possibility.
Right, and that's what I like, is the fact that the writers were smart enough to know that this is what the audience would be thinking.
We've all seen Blade Runner.
Right, exactly.
www.darkdiscussions.com, wherever podcasts are found.
Welcome back, as this is the Rhode Island Comic Con preview. Yes, every year on this podcast, even though it's horror month, we always do a Rhode Island Comic Con preview because, well, that's usually the biggest one in the New England area. And it's the one I usually go to every year as a VIP or press or whatever. So I decided this year was looking to be a great lineup. Seriously. With a lot of Scream guests. And right now this is 4 that have canceled. Yeah. One I've already talked about on this podcast. Go back a couple episodes. You'll see why I talked about that. And really kind of bummed me out. Seriously. Because I don't like people getting bullied. And the others are usually the obvious. They have work or currently have other projects in the works. So that you can't avoid, obviously. Even though that happened, it's still not a bad lineup horror-wise. And wrestling-wise, too. Because you also had a wrestling cancellation, too. Which did not help me out after the fact it was announced a week or two. Then all of a sudden, cancellation happened. Obviously, I hope he's wrestling because I'm going to be really pissed if he's not wrestling. And I'm talking about Swerve Strickland, everyone, because I was looking forward to meeting him, but apparently AEW pulled him from the appearance, which is understandable because they have a live event that weekend for Collision. So I'm hoping it's just the fact that he has a match on AEW Collision, because anything less, I'm probably not going to be happy. It was just going to bring him there just to have a promo or a backstage segment. You can just tape it. Seriously. And air it on Collision. But anyway, I'm over that. But first, before I get to all the horror and all the wrestling guests that will be there, I'll talk about some of the headliners that will be at Rhode Island Comic Con. First, you have Helen Hunt, Academy Award winning actress Helen Hunt. She's been in films such as Good As It Gets, Twisters, and of course, if you know me, I'm a big Full Moon Features fan, and she's been in the first 3 Trancers films too, so we cannot forget those films. Obviously, since this is a horror and wrestling podcast, we have to mention them. But she is one of the major headliners of this convention. Now, as I'm going down the list, you also have Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox from Back to the Future, as there's a big Back to the Future thing going on at Rhode Island Comic Con this year, as they have 4 of the major cast members from the franchise there all weekend. You also have, who else? Giancarlo Esposito. I was going to mention him later, but he's technically a headliner because, well, he's been on Disney's The Mandalorian alongside other recent horror films, Abigail and Maxine. So that was something that you can consider a headliner, obviously. You also have John Cleese from Monty Python fame, and A Fish Called Wanda, and Shrek. You also have, as I'm going down the list quickly, you also have Tatiana Maslany from She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, and the Orphan Black franchise. You have William Shatner from Star Trek, the original Star Trek show. And you have a lot of other things going on, including a Police Academy reunion, and also an American Pie reunion going on at that convention as well. Now on to what we are more inclined to talk about here on the podcast. Horror and wrestling. As there's a big bunch of stuff with horror and wrestling going on at this convention. Let's start off with the horror portion of Rhode Island Comic Con. We have a big Scream theme going on at this convention. We have Skeet Ulrich from Scream, Scream 5, Scream 6. We have David Arquette from the first 5 Scream films. Jamie Kennedy from Scream 1 and 2. Rose McGowan from Scream. Dermot Mahoney from Scream 6. Roger L. Jackson, the voice of Ghostface. You also have Lee Waddell from, I believe, the first 2 Scream films, also going to be there. And he will be doing an in-costume photo op as well, like he did at Silver Scream Con. A lot of Scream guests. I hope there's a couple more, seriously, because they've already lost like 4 people. And pretty much 3 of them I really wanted to meet. In fact, all 4 I really wanted to meet. But they all canceled. But I'm hoping they add 1 or 2 more Scream guests. Fingers crossed. As I don't care who it is, seriously, from that franchise. You want to bring in another Ghostface? That's fine. From Scream 3, that's fine. After that, the other major horror program going on at Rhode Island Comic Con is Ghostbusters Afterlife. As they're bringing in 3 of the stars of the film. They're bringing in Ernie Hudson, who was in the original Ghostbusters and the new Ghostbusters films. Plus he's been in The Crow as well. And a lot of other things too. You also have Mackenzie Grace, who was one of the lead stars of Ghostbusters Afterlife. And you have Logan Kim as well, who was one of the supporting actors in that film. You have 3 actors from Ghostbusters Afterlife who are going to be at Rhode Island Comic Con. Then we get a Friday the 13th portion. Surprise! Didn't expect this one at Rhode Island Comic Con this year. But we are getting one. Maybe because since Halloween is like a day before Rhode Island Comic Con, they've actually put some horror guests on this year's show, which is very good. I like that. First, you have Amanda Righetti from the Friday the 13th remake. Then you have Derek Mears from the remake as well. I'm definitely doing that photo op because I like the remake. Even though it's kind of a guilty pleasure film, I liked it a lot. Plus, Derek Mears is just a badass Jason, seriously. Probably my second favorite Jason to this guy. Kane Hodder will be at Rhode Island Comic Con as well, and he will be doing a Jason photo op. I don't know which Jason he's doing, but I'm definitely doing another Jason photo op. I did a Jason photo op with Ken Kingsinger at CT Horror Fest about a month ago. And I will be doing another one with Kane Hodder, obviously, because, well, Kane Hodder's Kane Hodder, obviously. So I'm definitely doing that. That's definitely on my list of things to do at Rhode Island Comic Con this year. I like the fact that they have some costume ops, as it really makes the photo ops way more fun to do. As it's not your basic, you take a picture with a celebrity and just leave. At least there's some thought to it. And it is fun. It can be fun, depending on the person you're taking the photo op with. Because I've had some really fun ones, seriously, over the years with these costume ops. So that's definitely on my list of things to do at Rhode Island Comic Con this year. You also have a couple people from The Walking Dead, John Benthal and Ross Marquardt. They'll be there as well. So you have some Walking Dead representation at this year's convention. You also have a couple more horror guests as well. You have Carissa Carpenter from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. And you have associate producer of Terrifier 3, Bill Diamond. He will be there. He's easy to find. You just find the booth where he has all these puppets, like from Little Shop of Horrors, the Muppets, as he's also a puppeteer too, and you'll be able to find his booth easily, as he also may bring his Emmy with him too, so that's an easy booth to find. Now to the wrestling portion of Rhode Island Comic Con. The show will bring 2 AEW stars, Britt Baker and Darby Allin, pending if they're not going to be on Collision. If they're on Collision, they will not be there, obviously. So, don't be surprised if they cancel, because if they cancel, most likely they'll end up on Collision. That's why I'm thinking Swerve Strickland is going to be on Collision that weekend. But then again, AEW has a show in Providence, Rhode Island, like 5-6 days later. So you would think they would have some representation at this convention. Because it'd be really stupid if AEW pulls both of them. That would be malpractice business-wise. Because you got a show in about 4 or 5 days. You might want to have your stars at that convention. Seriously. Pulling Swerve Strickland was an idiotic move on their part. Because you're having a show at the Amica Mutual Pavilion on that 4 days after the convention. So, they've already committed some malpractice by forcing Swerve Strickland off that convention. Now, they really need to do something to get some interest in their show. And by pulling Britt Baker and pulling Darby Allin, they will be committing business malpractice. I know they got their big TV deal, finally, and they're going to be on Max, but still, you want to build excitement for your show upcoming. And by pulling stars that may or may not be on that show, it's not a good sign to that area. It'll make it less likely for that area to show up at your show, especially when you really need attendance, as attendance for AEW shows have not been that great lately. Seriously. Now, with that out of the way, there's also more wrestling guests. We also have Bully Ray and Devon Dudley. You have Jeff and Matt Hardy. All four of those people are some of the best tag team wrestlers of all time. You have the Queen of Extreme, Francine. You have Lex Luger there. You have Kane, former WWE star, and Jacob Goodnight in See No Evil 1 and 2. You have Diamond Dallas Page, former WCW champion, and he also appeared in Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects. You have Ric Flair. You have Mick Foley and Rikishi at this convention. So it's pretty loaded on the wrestling side, as well as you have about 13 wrestling guests, which is a good number, I have to admit. So basically, this convention is loaded. You should definitely get down to Rhode Island, November 1st through the 3rd. Please note, the guest lists can change at any time, and any one of those names I mentioned could have canceled, as I'm recording this on October 21st. So, it may air and somebody may have canceled. That's podcasting. I'm not doing a live show. But to keep up to date with all the cancellations and everything, go to ricomiccon.com. And that is your 2024 Rhode Island Comic Con preview. If you want to find out the latest news for Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show, you can follow the podcast on the Slasher app, Facebook, and Instagram at Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling. You can also listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, DocDiscussions.com, and the Film Arcade Media YouTube channel at youtube.com/FilmArcadeMedia. What's Anthony T watching? Well, I told you at the beginning of the podcast that I would be watching a film that recently hit Screambox, and it is also a Halloween-themed film. And I told you, sometimes Screambox have good films, sometimes Screambox has bad films, like really bad films. So I knew what I was getting into when I came across a Halloween-themed film called Creeping Death that's currently playing on Screambox. That's exclusive to the streaming site. Now, according to the official synopsis of the film on the Screambox site, after a prank goes terribly wrong, Tim and his friends are hunted down by the Eos Psi, which is a Celtic entity that walks the earth on Halloween. And if I pronounced that Celtic word wrong, I apologize, because that's hard to pronounce. They have until midnight to make things right or die trying. So we are looking at another Halloween slasher film, everyone. It seems like every Halloween film is a slasher film. Ever notice that? Seriously, people? That every Halloween film, with maybe the exception of Night of the Demons, and you can probably even call that a slasher film too, is a slasher film? Seriously. It's like all these Halloween films are slasher films. We don't get any Halloween ghost stories or something different. It always has to be a slasher film on Halloween night. Ever notice that when it comes down to these Halloween films? A rare case you may get a supernatural film, but you don't get one of these ghost Halloween films. Not that type of supernatural film. But anyway, back to Creeping Death. Going into this, I saw the trailer for this film, and I thought to myself, maybe this might be a good film, then maybe it might not. It was like one of those films where the trailer had me kind of on the fence 50-50, not sure what to think about if this is going to be a good film or not. So I decided to check it out anyway, since I need a Halloween film to review here on the podcast, obviously. And this is the end of Halloween month on the podcast. So why not end this month with a Halloween-themed horror film? It kind of makes sense. Seriously. My thoughts on the film. This was not a very good film, everyone. Seriously. And you can easily tell when a horror film is really, really bad if you have to rush everything in the third act of the film. Seriously. If you have to rush everything in, get your death scenes in, get this, get that in that third act in the last 20-25 minutes, you know it's not a good film. Seriously. Because you're now rushing death scenes and you're just trying to get this movie over with. And this felt like the case here with Creeping Death here. Because everything just falls flat on its face. Seriously. It just does not have good directing, good writing. Nothing worked at all in this film. Director Matt Sampree really does not do a good job with his direction here, as everything in this film really falls flat, especially his direction. I really thought the scenes were very dull. I thought the action scenes in this film were very dull, very basic, non-suspenseful. Everything just felt dull. Maybe because it's a rural horror film, and I have problems with rural horror films. For some reason, that seems to be a weak spot for me in horror films. But there's better ways of making a better rural horror film. This was definitely not the way to do it, as I thought Sampree doesn't do a good job with the way he directs his cast. I just felt like everyone had one note to their performance. There's no charisma to any of these characters. They just felt flat, like your typical stereotypes that you would see in a horror film. It made me not care for any of the characters or their performances. If I don't care about their performances, why should I care about their characters? And most of it has to do with directing your actors. And Sampree doesn't do a good job with the way he directs his actors here, as everything felt flat in one note, which made the acting in the film very lifeless. And I did not like the way he handled the dialogue or action scenes as well in this film, as it too really had that same lifeless tone to it. And when you have a film that has a lifeless tone throughout, your film is not going to succeed. It just won't succeed. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You need to keep the viewer's attention. And this film did not keep my attention at all, because I literally was dozing off. Because there was nothing good about the action, nor the drama in this film. Nothing. And speaking of that screenplay was also really bad. It's like these characters are just like, are not built enough. They're too one-dimensional. When you have one-dimensional characters in a horror film, you just don't care about the characters. When you don't care about the characters, you have to hope your acting steps it up in the way you direct your actors and make sure your actors are giving it their all. this film did not have that. And once this film did not have that, it's pretty much a moot point. You are not going to like this film. And usually that means you turn off the film. But I have to review this film, so I had to stick with this film for the entire runtime. I was so glad when the credits came for this film, because this was just boring. Another boring Screambox film. As this is the third or fourth boring Screambox film I've watched all year. Because literally, when it comes down to 1-star films this year, I've gotten that as 1 star, which I'll officially say in a second. Followers with Screambox, that's a 1 star. Frogman, 1 star. Life of Bella, 1 star. And my thoughts on Creeping Death is a very dull and very boring Halloween film. Go check out other great Halloween films instead of this film. Go watch Late Night with the Devil. Go watch Trick or Treat. That's on Screambox. That's a great Halloween film. Or Trick or Treat. Or the original Halloween. Or either of Justin Siemens' The Bond films. As those films are very good films. Check those films out. Don't check out Creeping Death. It is horrible. From start to finish, if you see this film, you will be bored out of your mind for 90 minutes. That is a guarantee, because I was literally bored for the entire runtime. I don't know how this film gets on Screambox, seriously, because I just don't think this is a film that's a streaming service worthy film. Seriously. And now I will officially give Creeping Death 1 star, joining the list of other Screambox films that have gotten 1 star this year. On the Film Arcade Media YouTube channel, don't forget to check out my review of Terrifier 3, as that review is exclusive to the YouTube channel only. You can definitely check that review out at youtube.com at Film Arcade Media. Upcoming episodes for Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show. Next episode, I will have an interview. Guaranteed 100%. As I've already recorded this interview with actress Megan Adara, as we're going to talk about her latest film, The Cellar, British psychological horror film. She'll be on the podcast to chat about that film, as that interview will take up most of the episode. Then, episode 123 will be my thoughts on Rhode Island Comic Con 2024. I may also have thoughts on other things as well, depending on what's going on and everything. Then, episode 124 will probably be my thoughts on AEW's Full Gear. We'll get some wrestling thoughts in. I know we have been lacking on wrestling here, but there's been so much good horror lately. I can't help it. Seriously. This is a horror podcast first, a wrestling podcast second. So, I will talk about AEW's Full Gear on episode 124. Then that should lead us to the end of the year on this podcast. Then I will probably do a best of show as the second show in December, usually because I'm gearing up for the annual Horror Whammies, Horror Show Awards, and the top 10 films of 2024. 3 episodes. That takes a lot of work. Seriously. The most difficult episodes that I do every year on this podcast. The amount of production, the editing of the best of episode. So, there's going to be a lot of things going on here next couple episodes here on the podcast. So, as we get to 2025 here on the podcast. I can't wait to be more active. And who knows, I may have something up my sleeve for 2025. But that's a far away. If you like this episode, you can check out past episodes of the podcast over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, DocDiscussions.com, and the Film Arcade Media YouTube channel at youtube.com/FilmArcadeMedia. For information on upcoming episodes and everything, check out the show's official Facebook page, Instagram page, and Slasher page at Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling. With that, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a good day. Support indie wrestling. Support indie horror. This has been a Film Arcade Media production.